It would be quite unrealistic of me to wish I were worthy of the tributes, but I do wish I were adequate to the task of thanking you properly. I am very grateful to Colonel Bunker and Mrs. McKinney and all the others for their enormous expenditure of time, energy, and money to provide us this exhilarating 4th of July occasion every year. I am grateful that there are so many of us from so many parts of the country who share an unabashed pride in rallying to honor God, family, and country. I am grateful that our lives have been enriched by dedication in a cause to which we can rally with honor. I am grateful to Dean Mannion, Ed Griffin, John Rarick, and all the others for those, and the epic poetry of Bob Welch, and to all of those others who delivered eulogies, making me wish to long to get acquainted with that unique fellow they were talking about. And of course, I am grateful to all of you for this very exciting moment in my life. We are supposed to be living in a time when the generation gap is a yawning chasm and youth has no respect for age. I have not found it so in my personal experience. I've been around so long, I have become venerable. On my last trip, I had an experience that is commonplace with me nowadays. I met a young lady in her middle 30s who looked at me searchingly and spoke to me in tones of respect, I thought. She told me that when she was a kid in school, her parents used to make her watch my television program. Young parents reared in non-permissive homes often become even sterner disciplinarians than their own parents were. I don't know whether this is because they learned the value of discipline or whether subconsciously they're retaliating against their own children for what their parents did to them. In any case, this young lady makes her youngster now read the Dan Smoot report. But of course there are many perquisites that go with age. One is the fun of giving advice, whether solicited or not. The young lady I mentioned, like many other parents, wanted my advice on a college for her son where he would not be exposed to liberal socialist distortions of history and debasement of learning. I suggested she equip him with a suit of armor and let him go where he pleased. If we parents wait until the colleges form the character of our children, it may be too late to expect anything worthwhile. I believe a youngster whose home life gave him sufficient exposure to love of God and country, who has enough native intelligence to understand liberty, and who was endowed with enough courage to value it, will be impregnable to the asininities and stupidities of liberal professors. Now, if it does turn out that he has an appetite for Galbraithian swill dished up as higher learning, I don't think his parents will make a major contribution to civilization or help him very much by pauperizing themselves to keep him in college. I'd suggest they take him off the dole. Let him get a job and pay for his own brainwashing. Young people dedicated to our noble cause of restoring the American constitutional republic often ask me what they ought to do about liberal professors and the socialist propaganda assigned as required reading. I suggest they listen to the professor and read the required books if they want to get passing grades. The broad-minded objectivity that liberal intellectuals boast of is not something they practice. It's something they talk about when condemning us constitutionalists for being narrow and prejudiced. Some of our fine youngsters, of course, feel obligated to try to convert their liberal professors. I don't recommend that. If he's old enough to be a professor and is still a liberal, he's probably hopeless. My own son Larry has had some experience with liberal teachers. Because Larry has grown up in an environment of books and writing, most people assume he is a scholar. That is not entirely accurate. Larry has an allergic condition which textbooks seem to aggravate. Nonetheless, he was selected last year to take an advanced course in world history. His mother did not think he was ready at age 15 for an advanced course in anything. I didn't either, but I figured he was about as ready as he'd ever be, so he took it. About the middle of the first semester, Mrs. Smoot suggested I look at Larry's report card. I didn't want to do it. I don't believe in compulsory education. But I've been married to Mrs. Smoot 36 years, and I have learned that when she suggests something to me, well, I looked at Larry's report card. He was doing all right in other subjects, but was on the ragged edge of failure in world history. Mrs. Smoot suggested I have a talk with Larry. I didn't want to do that either, but I did. I cornered him in the backyard where I found him building a complicated cage to trap a raccoon painlessly and simultaneously trigger my best tape recorder so that he could learn the vocal, emotional reaction of a trapped coon. I asked him how he built the contraption, and he said he just used his head. Well, that gave me a pretty good opening. I asked him why he wasn't using his head in world history. Larry replied, "My teacher is a nut." Well, I was prepared to believe that because he had been relaying to me certain of his teacher's ideas, such as we needn't worry about the national debt because we just owe it to ourselves, and about our imperialistic provocations against the peaceful People's Republic of North Korea. But I thought I ought to be broad-minded and ask for some more evidence, and Larry gave it to me. He told me about the teacher's recent lecture on the theory of evolution. The biblical account of creation is a fable because man obviously descended from the primates and so on. Well, I'd never really discussed that subject with Larry, so I asked him how he felt about it. And he said, "Well, it doesn't make much sense to me, because if we all came from monkeys, I don't see why all the monkeys are still around." And then he added, "I'd think all the monkeys would be evoluted into world history teachers." I did not feel that my discussion with Larry about his world history grade was taking exactly the course his mother had in mind. I told him it didn't matter how idiotic his teacher was. He had a textbook, and it was his responsibility to study it. And he said, "The book's nutty, too." I sometimes think that the late W.C. Fields was partially right when he said, "Any man who hates kids and dogs can't be all bad." Seeing that it was impossible, quite impossible, to have a productive discourse with the boy, I did what all sensible parents ultimately learn to do. I stopped the discussion and gave him a lecture. And I thought I did a pretty good job, too. One line I hit upon, though it did not seem to dazzle Larry, pleased me enormously. And I plan to use it when giving advice to other kids. I said, "Integrity in clinging to your high principles as a patriot and a constitutionalist is no justification for sloppy work and failing grades." Now, the privilege of saying something like that without having to listen to a lot of back talk is one of those perquisites of age I mentioned. Though I have been around long enough to see the elephant and hear the owl, I did miss one experience that would have been worth circling the globe to enjoy. I never got to see my Aunt Blanche in action if some pubescent semi-literate had tried to push her out of a pulpit and deliver obscene extortion demands to her congregation. My Aunt Blanche was a spinster, a biblical scholar, and a traveling evangelist. I did not have the privilege of being around her after I was about 9 years old, but she is still vivid in my memory. While I was a very small child, I spent one entire summer traveling with her while she preached. Occasionally we stayed for a week in some city church, but mostly we made one-night stands at tent meetings, country churches, and village meeting places. All that summer we went up and down the Mississippi, from as far north as St. Louis to as far south as Memphis. Once we ventured eastward toward the land of Sodom and Gomorrah. We got as far as Cincinnati. I still remember quivering on the back row of a country church, listening to the powerful voice of Aunt Blanche, delivering devastating assault on sin and sinners. She was not merely persuasive, she was terrifying. The fires of hell never burned more brightly than when she described them. The moaning of lost souls echoed in her wake. Her image of God's heaven was simple and beautiful. It was the only utopia, and no easy roads led to it. Aunt Blanche did not compromise or have dialogues with the devil. She smote him front and rear, took him on both flanks, and drove him from the field. She was not objective, she was prejudiced. She did not have tolerance, she had conviction. And what a magnificently healing experience it would be to hear Aunt Blanche thundering from some major pulpit today. When Aunt Blanche died, she did not have much of an estate, but she had a will, and I was in it. She left me her Bible. I remembered her well enough to know why she did it. She figured I needed it. I have derived much pleasure from thumbing through Aunt Blanche's Bible, examining the passages she heavily underscored, and reading her marginal comments. Recently, I found a passage which gave me a clue to what Aunt Blanche's attitude would have been toward the young neo-Neanderthals now blackmailing the churches, the government, the colleges, and telling us that America is a worn-out failure that must bow down to their demands. The passage is in Job. Elihu, a young man, is berating Job, who is very old. Elihu says, I am young in years, and ye are aged. Therefore I was timid and afraid to declare my opinion to you. I said, let days speak, and many years teach wisdom. But it is the spirit in a man that makes him understand. Therefore I say, listen to me. Let me declare my opinion. Aunt Blanche had circled that passage, and in the margin she had written, smart aleck. Aunt Blanche lived in a world that was rather well attuned to her, that was fortunate because otherwise there would have been jarring disharmony. I, on the other hand, seem to have some capacity for being right at the wrong time. For example, jogging has been a universal fad for the last 2 or 3 years. I was running 5 miles a day on the streets of Dallas nearly 40 years ago. I was not acclaimed a pioneer. I was considered a lunatic. I was not put on the President's Physical Fitness Commission, but I came perilously close to being put in the Dallas City Jail. It was a fine spring day in 1932. Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow, Dallas's 2 most heralded celebrities, were still at large and at the peak of their career. The night before, on the outskirts of Dallas, they had murdered a couple of men just for the fun of it, and were believed to be still in the area. I was taking my daily run. Suddenly, a squad car screeched to a stop in front of me. 2 policemen leaped out with guns drawn, and before I could ask what it was all about, they had me in the car, my hands cuffed behind me, and we were headed for police headquarters with sirens screaming. Later, they told me apologetically that I was a dead ringer for Clyde Barrow. You know, the sins of the father are sometimes visited upon the son in mysterious ways. We have 2 sons, you know. Our older boy looks like Billy Solestis. The world event Blanche has gone with the wind. In that yesteryear of history, the United States was a nation on the North American continent, contiguous to only two other nations, Mexico and Canada. Now, thanks to foreign aid, every other nation on earth touches the United States. This must be what liberals mean when they say the world is shrinking so fast that we can no longer survive as an independent nation. We can carry the world on our back, but we cannot stand alone. I first became acquainted with the complicated rationale and semantics of totalitarian liberalism and of the new values and attitudes they were producing when I came up here to study and teach at Harvard. I bring this in again to remind you of my badge of respectability. Now, as a boy, I had spent a great deal of time making a living in an occupation which today would have me classified both as a child laborer and a migrant farm worker. But I did not find out until years later, when I went to Harvard, that rich people, like the Roosevelts and the Rockefellers and the Kennedys, and learned intellectuals, like Justice William O. Douglas, the court Nestor, such folks felt sorry for people like me. They considered us a shameful blight on the American scene, and they wanted to improve us. Now, I did notice then and later, as Tom Anderson pointed out this afternoon, that rich liberals who want to uplift us downtrodden never want to do it with their own money. Now, I will not deny for a moment that I probably needed some improving and uplifting when I went to Harvard. There were advantages I had been denied. Having been a child laborer and a migrant farm worker, I had never enjoyed enough leisure to become a juvenile delinquent. I never had an opportunity to join a communist youth group. I never even associated with communists and fellow travelers. There simply weren't any among the black and brown and medium white farmhands and truck drivers I'd worked with. In fact, I was so disadvantaged that I did not even know four-letter words were literature. I had so much to learn and so far to go that my Harvard indoctrination in the complexities of liberalism was not altogether easy and painless. At a faculty tea one afternoon, I fell to talking with a great scholar who was writing a dissertation for his doctorate on what he called a societal study of Latin Americans in the United States. So I tried to tell him about an old Mexican friend of mine down in Dallas. Now, I was not trying to show off, really. I knew I was not competent in this scholar's special field of study. In fact, I could hardly pronounce the name of his special field. But from listening to him, I did feel that by living and working among Mexicans, I had acquired certain information which his research had overlooked. He did not appreciate my contribution to his learning. He looked at me as if I were something laundered in brand X. Now, he might have welcomed my help if I had gone about it correctly. He was, as all modern liberals say of themselves, open-minded, which means that he would readily accept any new idea or information which reinforced a prejudice he already had. My effort to add a point to a societal study of Latin Americans in the United States was wrong because I used what the Harvard scholar called hate-inciting language. That is, I called Mexicans Mexicans, which is what Mexicans call themselves in Dallas. But I learned from him that that is a term of contempt and that I ought to say Latin Americans. It was hard for me to keep such subtle distinctions in mind because I had grown up in a free and friendly America where healthy people had little sensitive self-consciousness about race and creed, where the class-conscious hatreds of the old world had not yet taken roots. Now, of course, times are altered. Even the old Stephen Foster melodies must be rewritten. because their affectionate commentaries on darkies are considered hateful. Those that cannot be revised to suit the homogenized taste of modern liberalism must be banned. Old Black Joe has to go, because no one has found a way to preserve the melody and the rhythm after Old Black Joe has been translated into ancient Afro-American Joseph. But why did they banish Little Black Sambo? I liked that intelligent, brave little African boy, and I hated to see him leave. The contradictions of totalitarian liberals dumbfound me. While angrily demanding something they call black culture studies, they suppress a delightful children's classic about a little Negro boy. It doesn't make any sense. We are supposed to be the book burners. As you know, I left Harvard to go into the FBI. There is, I know, a great deal of interest in the FBI and wonder about the glamour of service in it. Since this is a relaxed gathering of friends, I'll just tell you about one of my important FBI cases. In fact, my first FBI case. From training school on the Marine Corps base at Quantico and in Washington, I went to my first office of assignment, Portland, Oregon. When I arrived, I found that they already had a case assigned to me. They wanted me to find the man the FBI had been looking for 5 years. He was mean. He was wanted not only by the FBI, but by police departments all over the United States for everything from bank robbery to bigamy. I was pleased that my first special agent in charge had assigned me such a case. I supposed he had reviewed my personnel file and had perceived my true worth as a sleuth. I later learned that that's just the kind of dog-eared case to give a new agent. There's so little he can do with it, he will have minimum possibilities of doing something wrong. But I had luck. Before I finished reviewing the old file, the FBI office in Portland got an anonymous telephone call from someone who had seen the fugitive's picture on an FBI wanted notice and knew the man. He had worked with him just a few months before at a logging camp way back in the heart of the Willamette National Forest. Well, I set out to find him. As it turned out, my hardest job was finding the logging camp. But I did, and as I drove in, I rehearsed some of the lessons I had learned in training school, especially the proper use of FBI credentials, so that the person interviewed would have no doubt about who I was. I was careful, even rather elaborate about it. When I found the foreman of the logging camp, I handed him my FBI credentials and let him examine them while I was talking to him. Now, the FBI credentials fold like a wallet. FBI in large blue letters are displayed. There is some text telling what an FBI agent's duties are. There are signatures of J. Edgar Hoover, of the United States Attorney General, and of the agent, and there is a picture of the agent. While I was explaining my mission to this foreman, he was staring at my credentials. I thought he was reading all that stuff about my duties, but when I paused and gave him a chance to say something, he said, I could tell from looking at him he was no good, and then he pointed at my picture and said, that's the varmint right there. As all of you realize, reminiscing instead of making a speech is another one of those perquisites of age. I promise, however, to skip a few episodes, though none of the really important ones. After nearly 10 years in the FBI, I resigned and went into my present line of work. And 4 years later, in 1955, Mrs. Smoot and I started the report. And in that same year, we bought a home, something I'd been dreaming about for years. A house and a little piece of earth that belonged to us. We found a sprawling, aging, two-story colonial sitting back from a wide lawn, protected from the Texas sun by giant elms and oaks, pecan and crabapple trees, a silver maple and a magnolia, and one little East Texas sweet gum that turns brilliant yellow in the autumn. Certain freeloading tenants went with the place, all with inalienable squatters' rights. A colony of squirrels, a family of raccoons, a few vain cardinals, a brace of mourning doves, some raucous blue jays, a bevy of mockingbirds, and one possum. I wanted the whole package, wildlife and all, especially after we examined the old blueprints and found that the foundation of that house rested on solid rock. It would endure. We have modernized it a little through the years, but we haven't altered the basic plan or tinkered with the foundation. It is by no means a perfect dream house. I know its weaknesses and its strengths, but I do sometimes wonder whether I own that place or it owns me. I guess I thought, if I thought at all, that it was sturdy enough to take care of itself. The paint would always be gleaming white, the grass forever neat and green. And those trees would flourish unattended, as they apparently had done, many of them, for more than 100 years. I have learned a lot about the responsibility that comes with the fulfillment of a dream, and about some other things, too. I now know, for example, why you never see an old tree surgeon. Before the age of 40, they all retire rich. I have discovered that every October, precisely in the month when I become 1 year older, every one of those trees sheds 10 million leaves. I found out about a mysterious, invisible, voracious bug, which overnight can kill a wide swath of grass across a lawn and leave your front yard looking like Sherman's March to the Sea. I have learned that upstairs plumbing always erupts in the middle of a winter night or when you have guests for dinner. All expensive household appliances go out the day after the warranty expires. If we leave town for the weekend, squirrels burrow into the attic, ivy clogs the rain spouts, aphids attack the roses, and the possum scatters garbage in the alley. But I have to leave town every once in a while to get some rest. Yet, when I return, when I round the corner and see my home, the great trees towering over that old house, still standing tall and straight and proud, I get a lump in my throat. And so I guess it will always be until the Octobers run out for me. As I see it, this land, this place of infinite variety, from Bering Strait to the Florida Keys, from the potato farms of Maine to the silent sun-baked beauty of El Centro, this beloved America is not entirely unlike that home of mine. This republic was the fulfillment of a dream, not of one man, but of many. Its foundation rested on the solid rock of the Constitution, and the superstructure seemed sturdy enough to take care of itself, and so it was neglected and taken for granted. Today it is plagued with human parasites. It is flooded with lawlessness. A foreign fungus blights it with unholy ideology. Its streets, the halls of its institutions are ravished with the flames of destruction. Its proud banner is despoiled by scavengers. Corruption eats at its moral fiber, but it is still our land. We must protect it, defend it, rescue it. If necessary, we must rebuild it. It is our country. We have none other. We want none other. Anything else for us is unthinkable. Not one of us will rest until this republic stands straight and tall and proud on its firm foundation once again. God bless you.
I trust you're as overwhelmed as I am with gratitude for the people who have taken part this evening, for the magnificent character they reveal, and particularly for Dan Smoot.